Today I'm going to talk about before you take ibuprofen, try this instead. And I know that some of you might have been waiting for a lecture here from someone else. They had to cancel at the last minute due to some health emergency. So I appreciate the opportunity for the Real Truth About Health to allow me to come in and just to give another lecture. So let's get started. Before you take ibuprofen, try this instead. So what is the problem? So let's talk about what is the problem. The problem is this, and if for those who read my book, An Inflammation Nation, the 10 definitive steps of preventing, reversing, and treating all diseases using diet, lifestyle, and the use of natural anti-inflammatories, I go into this, and also my previous lectures here on the Real Truth About Health, which I've given about 6 so far, is we talk about smoking, we talk about solar radiation, alcohol. I spend a lot of time here, and most of these practitioners on this program will be talking about why we should be eating a whole food plant-based diet. And I speak heavily in my book about the standard American diet and its dangers, as well as the problems with certain fads like ketogenic diets and paleo diets, and really where this is causing and contributing to most of our diseases. And unfortunately, we all in the last 3 years went through a pandemic, and which is just recently kind of overcoming the hump. And we learned about viruses, but we also can get infections with bacteria and parasites. Also, unfortunately, there's a whole issue with climate and how that's affecting our bodies, stress and inflammation as well, chemical toxicity. So all these different aspects, which all of us around the world have exposure to and experience, some more than others, is contributing to inflammation. But what is inflammation? So inflammation, just shortly, in my book, we'll cover it. My previous lectures go into much detail. But inflammation is the triggering mechanism of all diseases. So when you think of like heart disease, diabetes, you think of even cancer or autoimmune disease. And in the past, again, 3 years, we had this pandemic with this virus that caused a systemic inflammatory response and was very dangerous. Some people actually died, as there was over 1.5 million people have passed away from COVID. But it's the stacking effect of inflammatory responses in our body on top of the chronic inflammation that we have. And so our goal is to always be lowering this inflammatory response. So what is the inflammation, though? Inflammation is like fire within your body, right? So we do need a certain amount of inflammation, right? We do need to, when we exercise, you're going to have a little bit of inflammation, a little bit of soreness. But if you have too much inflammation, then it causes degeneration. The chronic inflammatory response is a damaging response. And so when we think of inflammation, the root of the word inflammation just comes from the word flam, fire. And the suffix is itis, I-T-I-S. And all that means is that anything that you put in before it, and it has the word itis, just means inflammation of that area. So when you think of controlled inflammation, which your body does need some, we can't have zero. And that's where some of the side effects later on we'll talk about when we give certain drugs, or now certain autoimmune drugs and certain cancer drugs or immunotherapy drugs or suppressor drugs, we are controlling it too much. And that can be a double-edged sword. But think of the body like your house. You have a kitchen, you have a living room, and you have your bed. You want to have a certain temperature that it keeps it warm, right? You want to cook your food at a certain temperature. You want your house to be a certain temperature, and you want your bed nice and cozy. However, when there's uncontrolled inflammation down here, we will think of like a kitchen fire, or maybe your bedroom caught on fire, or your living room caught on fire. That's too much and it's damaging. So when we look at inflammation, that chronic inflammation that we get, acute would be a trauma, for example. Acute would be an allergic attack. Acute would be a sprained ankle, for example. We're talking about the chronic issues, that it's lingering. It's longer for weeks and weeks or months or even decades. But chronic inflammation leads to chronic diseases. So when we have a healthy joint, a normal knee, over time, we get more arthritis and degeneration of that joint, right? Osteoarthritis, bone inflammation. You have a colon. So we have a normal colon, and then we have inflammation of that colon. We call it ulcerative colitis, or even things like Crohn's disease. And the number one killer right now still in the United States and around the world is heart disease. So we're looking at eating high animal protein diets, which is full of cholesterol and saturated fats. That causes this inflammatory response, both from the pro-inflammatory foods and the cholesterol from that foods, causing heart disease. And we even look at things like now with dementias and brain disorders or mood disorders or even cognitive disorders, we're looking at inflammation triggering beta amyloid, tau, and tangle proteins that actually cause dysfunction and degeneration of the brain. So inflammation is a systemic problem that we're all getting exposed to. Now, the further problem is there's over 200 different itis conditions, and most of us around the world on a daily basis will be suffering from some of these. Now, some of them will be minor, but some of them will be major. So I'll just give you some examples. Starting with my top of my head, some people can get a dermatitis, maybe in their scalp. Maybe they can get a runny nose, they get a rhinitis or sinusitis, or they can get red eyes, conjunctivitis, or we can get, a sore throat, pharyngitis, or if we speak too much or we sing too much, we can get a laryngitis, right? We can get also a thyroiditis, which a lot of people have. We can get bronchitis of our lungs. We can get esophagitis, reflux and heartburn and gastritis, and we can get a colitis, and we can get an arthritis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, prostatitis, vaginitis. So everybody can have some kind of itis. The challenge is that these inflammatory triggers are predominantly coming from the diet, and we have to look at and the environment and also the lifestyle. And in my book, An Inflammation Nation, I give you the 10 steps of how to prevent and reverse those through diet and lifestyle. Now, the bigger problem with chronic inflammation is not just degeneration of disease, but it's also that it's a pathway to cancer over time. So what happens is, for example, in ulcerative colitis patients, 43% of them over about 30 years will develop into having colon cancer. A patient with active rheumatoid arthritis over 10 years has a 71-time higher rate of getting a lymphoma than the general population. And even a little inflammatory response from HPV on the cervical tissue may, in 10 to 20 years, turn into cervical cancer in that patient. So we now know that inflammation is not only just a short-term, but a long-term problem. And those that have it even longer put themselves at further risk of even worse diseases and conditions such as cancer. So what's the problem again? Well, the problem is this: standard American lifestyle and diet. Although everybody will look at the picture on the right and say, this is what we should eat, the problem is that most of the majority of Americans are still eating what's on the left, right? We're eating highly ultra processed food, highly animal protein food, saturated fats, high salt, high sugar. My book will cover all this in detail. Also, for those who will say, well, you know what? I don't eat this kind of food. I don't eat fast food, Dr. Pai. I actually eat clean. I eat organic. I get my grass-fed beef, and I get my wild-caught fish, and I get my free-range chicken. To be surprising, the data will show, and my book will cover this. It's 450 pages, over 1,000 references to the scientific research and data published, is that organic meats do not show any health benefits versus conventional. So although we were told to pay more per pound, because that was our get out of jail free card of like, hey, let me just eat something healthier or cleaner, that cleanness of paying a little bit more did not decrease our rate of getting cancer, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, etc. Okay, so be careful of not falling into the trap where the industry is trying to tell us like, well, let's just eat cleaner meat. So I only eat grass-fed, Dr. Pai. But the thing is, we'll understand is that in my book, we'll talk about even the grass now is GMO. Most of the grass is a Scots division of Monsanto. And so even the alfalfa and the hay as well. So there's that also will bioaccumulate into food, and that will be a problem. So we want to move to an anti-inflammatory diet. So what is an anti-inflammatory diet? Well, anti-inflammatory diet is this. And, hopefully when you watch this at home, when you go back and rewatch this video, you will just stop and pause and take a look at this. At the end of the day, if anybody asks you, well, why are you eating more plant-based? And why should you not eat a keto diet or a paleo diet or a carnivorous diet, for example, is that if you understand this slide, that's all you need to know. And if most people will argue the other opposite, saying you should be eating these other pro-inflammatory foods, then that truly makes me understand that they don't fully get or understand the complexities and nuances of the immune system, about the microbiome, of physiology, and just overall health. Animal proteins are pro-inflammatory, right? It has little to no antioxidants, even grass-fed and wild-caught. It has no phytonutrients. And so what is a phytonutrient? Phytonutrients, everything that you see in the health store that comes in a pill, right? Every kind of beta carotene and curcumin and ginger and every resveratrol, every lycopene, everything that's a plant phyto, meaning plant nutrient, only comes from plants. And so when we see at the health store, there is no pig pill, there's no chicken pill, there's no bacon pill, there's no beef pill, there's no fish pill actually that we give to actually prevent or reverse or treat diseases. In fact, it's actually the omega-3 from the fish, which is the oil, not even the protein. But remember, none of those foods have fiber. How are you going to feed your microbiome? I had a whole lecture on a previous episode of The Real Truth About Health on the microbiome and how to fix it, how to restore it and repair your microbiome. So go back and listen to that lecture. And I'll talk about dysbiosis, endotoxins, all the different aspects of what are the pro-inflammatory triggers that increase cancer growth, all the other pro-inflammatory triggers that cause insulin resistance, diabetes, heart disease. And then now we're looking at even further in one of my previous lectures that I gave was on the bioaccumulation of pesticides, herbicides, heavy metals, and environmental toxins. So anti-inflammatory foods are from plants. So if someone has a pro-inflammatory problem, the first thing I always do with my patients is check and try to move them towards a plant-based diet. And if you go back to one of my previous lectures, we will talk about how we actually look at food sensitivity testing and even look at in the plant kingdom of all the foods, what foods may also be triggering inflammatory responses from your immune system functioning. So the idea is to be shifting over towards an anti-inflammatory diet. But the problem is that we're an inflammation nation. We are on fire politically, environmentally, physically, mentally, spiritually, even financially. Things are kind of on fire. So we need to calm that fire down. Now, most people that have inflammation, there's another problem. And the problem is the following. We go to, as a public in general, the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories called NSAIDs. They are our problem. Why? Well, first of all, let's talk about what is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory. It's exactly what it says. It's a non-steroid, so it's not a prednisone or a cortisone, but it's an anti-inflammatory. And a lot of people forget that it's a drug. Okay, this is actually a drug. And the problem is, although it's very commonly used, I will go over today why you should not be taking the ibuprofen and taking something else like Boswellia instead. Now, we've seen all of these, and in fact, most of us, if not all of us, have taken some of these in our lifetime. Some of you who are watching right now are taking maybe one or two of these right now as I speak. It's the most widely class of drugs taken daily. 1/3 of all Americans use these products on a daily basis. Let me repeat that. 1/3 of all Americans, that's 100 million Americans a day are using these products, right? Now, when we talk about ibuprofen is the molecule, okay? Ibuprofen here, and then this is the brand names, right? So people will see the brand name like Advil or Motrin, and we see naproxen. Naproxen is another non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, and a brand name that is commonly marketed would be like Aleve, and celecoxib, which is a prescription drug given by doctors. It's called Celebrex, and then the most common one that people will see is acetaminophen, or a brand name known as Tylenol. All these are non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. Also included is aspirin. Now, there's 30 different types of these types of products, meaning since they're generic, many brands. So if you go to the store, you can go see a Walmart brand, a CVS, every pharmacy will have their type of brand. And there's over 111 million prescriptions. So we're not just talking about what's being purchased over the counter. We're also talking about doctors are also prescribing on top of that. Over 30 billion over-the-counter NSAIDs are purchased per year. That's a lot, 30 billion, okay? So when we go over and say later on why this is still occurring, it will start explaining to you is you just have to follow the money and why this is so profitable, but why is it so damaging? So what is the problem again? Well, the problem is the following. Most people don't understand the dangers behind NSAIDs. So let's start with this. NSAIDs degenerate your joints. So now over the past 10 years, we have a lot of data, both in animal and in human studies, showing that within 2 years of patients who use NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, taking ibuprofen, taking naproxen, taking celecoxib, for example, is that it actually accelerates the X-ray. When we take an X-ray, we can actually see the progression of degeneration of osteoarthritis within 2 years. So the interesting thing is that it also decreases your joint space. It also decreases your inhibition of proteoglycans, your cellular matrix of the components that make this. It decreases the chondrocytes and collagen, which means that it's deteriorating the joints as you take it. So when we look at this, most people take an NSAID because we have joint pain. That's the indication. Does it help with the pain? Yes, it does. Does it help make the pain go away? Yes, it does. Does it actually heal the joint of pain? No, it doesn't. And in fact, it has a negative effect on the cartilage, and it causes acceleration and deterioration of the joint. So people who take it for osteoarthritis or back pain or hip pain or knee pain or joint pain, it actually accelerates the very disease for why they're using it. And it becomes cyclical, right? So when most people started taking these drugs, they might go, and this is something that you might, listening here, might know or have the same story. Oh yeah, I used to have some pain. I used to take, an ibuprofen once a day. Eventually it went to twice a day. Sometimes then it goes 2 times or 3 times a day. Then I had to add some naproxen or Aleve to it. Eventually I had to go to my doc, and then they added Celebrex. Sometimes they're compounding on these things as well. But don't make things worse, because now we know that most people have joint problems. And now we have to look at how many people are now getting joint injections. They're getting stem cell injections. They're getting hyaluronic acid injections into their knees and joints. They're getting steroids into their joints. And they're also getting knee replacements. Now, another thing that people don't know is that the NSAIDs also slow down healing. It actually lowers the collagen production. Now, we used to think right now in the studies, it shows, okay, slowing down healing of injured ligaments, muscles, bones, and other tissues. I'll talk about other tissues in a second. But even, for example, in studies where we give a Toradol injection, which is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory that's given by injection, we give it all the time in orthopedics. We give it in the ER all the time when people have back pain, they come in, or some kind of acute pain. We give it a little bit of injection of Toradol. It actually, when they give it before surgery, so that when you wake up after surgery, you won't have pain, which is a great idea, right? Like, let's preload the patient with an anti-inflammatory. The problem is that it increases the greater laxity in the repair of the knee 6 weeks later, meaning the collagen is not as strong. So the knee is not as strong, even though we just did a repair, right? And a lot of times we just blame the patient. Well, maybe they had a bad injury. Maybe this is the multiple repeat of the injuries, et cetera, et cetera. We need to switch over to an anti-inflammatory diet. And then we need to also start giving them anti-inflammatories that are safe, that do not cause collagen lowering production properties. It delays healing of rotator cuff surgeries, muscle strain, and ligaments. Well, the most common use of NSAIDs is that, right? Like, especially if you're an athlete, if you're a runner, or you're a bodybuilder, or you're any kind of sport athlete, you sprain your ankle, you hurt your shoulder, you're spraining your back, you're tired or achy, you pop these pills almost on a regular basis, not understanding that it is actually decreasing your collagen. Now, the most important thing is, where the research is showing you in the last couple of years that we've started to look at, is that when we say, we were just looking in the studies of just, well, it's an orthopedic drug and we're looking at an orthopedic problem like my joints and ligaments and stuff. So let's look at this collagen, where it's going. But what we're now looking at is that, guess what? It's the collagen that's also in the rest of your body. So how many people now you'll see, have collagen problems, right? Like, they're looking at premature aging, sagging in the face, just the creepy skin. And then what are they doing? They're getting collagen injections, or even worse, people are taking collagen protein powders or collagen peptides, which is just waste product that is coming from the animal hide. It actually comes from the skin of the cows, believe it or not. And that's what they do, right? And so they're trying to say, well, if you take this as a food product, it's going to go to that area. In fact, the data shows that it doesn't. I have a whole other lecture. If you go to sanjevani.net, sign up, SANJEVANI.net, sign up for our newsletter. We'll have a weekly podcast. We go into these topics in great detail about certain products that people take, like collagen and bone broth, and now collagen peptide powders that people think and are marketing that are doing some benefits, but in fact, they actually have heavy metals, pesticides, herbicides, prescription drugs, pro-inflammatory, no phytonutrients, no fiber, no antioxidants, and they're actually damaging, but they're sold limitlessly and are almost the top sellers in every category of the health food store. Now, NSAIDs also cause heart and GI problems. So it increases your risk of heart attack. Now, most people, remember, the number one cause of death in America is heart attack. 3 people every minute have a heart attack in the United States. And it increases the risk 19%. So even if you're eating plant-based, right? Your cholesterol, your LDL, your HDL is good, your LDL is low, your bad cholesterol is low, and your total cholesterol is low because you're not eating animal protein, and you still have back pain, because you're exercising, working out, or you have some trauma or damage to your joints or back or muscles, or you have a chronic condition that you're trying to take the inflammation down, it increases it 19%. So you're already increasing your risk of heart attack, even if you're already reducing the risk from other means. It increases stroke, heart failure, and atrial fibrillation and flutter. Now, one of the things that we've also been seeing in the literature is that recently, in the last decade, atrial fibrillation is just becoming a common thing. When I was a resident over 30 years ago, It was rare. Like someone that had AFib, we would call it, or flutter, or any kind of these kind of heart palpitation problems, contractility problems, we would send them to cardiology. And the cardiologist would have to give and manage these kind of specific patients. Now you'll see that there's commercials on television. It's very common. People have atrial fib and atrial flutter, and you go and your primary doctor now is adding medications for control of this dysregularity of rhythm. But the key is when we look and investigate, are those patients taking NSAIDs? And the answer is more commonly, yes. It also increases blood pressure. So how many people in America have blood pressure? A lot of people take blood pressure pills every day, right? So they got back pain, they got blood pressure, got some arthritis. So they're taking all these things that are compounding, and then the doctor's prescribing something more for their blood pressure, something possible for atrial fibrillation, and maybe they're still having to take a statin because they haven't moved plant-based yet. Now, the other aspect is GI bleeds. 16,000 people die each year directly from taking an NSAID. 103,000 are hospitalized. Now, in my book, I cover this, like, even the data over the last 20, 30 years, because it's been now summarized in large studies. And I'll also talk about like how many tens of billions of dollars has this cost the taxpayer for these hospitalizations and for these deaths on when people buy penny wise, pound foolish, some NSAID because inexpensive. And yet, what is the cost of a hospitalization, or what is unfortunately the cost of someone's life? But more importantly, in the last 5 years, as we've been studying the microbiome, we did know that, yes, people who have GERD, right, which is reflux, and ulcers, which are common, right? These things are caused and increased in higher rates and risks with people who take NSAIDs. So how many people take a PPI, a proton pump inhibitor, such as Prilosec or propanzol or omeprazole? A large percent of the population. Interesting thing is the doctor will say, hey, if you're taking an NSAID, we need to give you a PPI to help with the issue of reflux. But it becomes a vicious circle because the drug is causing the reflux, and then they take a drug that actually will cause increase of other risks, such as microbiome dysfunction and other aspects of even cancer risk down the line. Now, more importantly, is in the last 5 years, since we have now microbiome studies and we're learning more how to test for that, we can actually show, and the data has been showing, that it's not just the bleeds and the ulcers. So this is really dangerous, right? Like people will have an acute bleed and they'll die, or most of them, thank God, will not die, but they'll end up going to the hospital, still having complications from that. But now we understand that it increases what we call increased intestinal permeability, what they call leaky gut. It increases small intestinal bacterial overgrowth called SIBO, and also increases gut dysbiosis, which are bacterial overgrowths. So when I see patients that have these conditions, more often than not, also they're taking an NSAID. So these are the things that most people have: heart problems, GI problems, and then worsening osteoarthritis or joint pain. And yet the thing that they're taking itself is contributing to that problem, in addition to diet and lifestyle. So another problem is, well, NSAIDs are also common found in other products, right? So people are like, hey, I don't take Tylenol, I don't take these products for my back. I don't have back pain, I don't have osteoarthritis, but people have cold and flu, morning and night pills. I need something for sleep, I need something for my allergies, and not understanding that these all have NSAIDs also combined in them. Why? Because inflammation to lower, everybody feels better. Everybody has a little bit of aches or pains. Even if you have a little bit of sinus ache or allergy, that's an inflammatory response. So symptomatically, it is helpful. And in fact, even the acetaminophen that most people think, which is Tylenol, for example, which is the safer out of all of the NSAIDs, though, they had to increase the warning on the Tylenol because of toxicity to the liver. Why? Because the average American, when they actually analyzed it, was taking over 3,000 milligrams a day, not knowing it. Why? Because most people say, I don't take Tylenol, Dr. Pai. And then I go, well, what do you take for allergy? Oh, I take this cold and sinus. I take this AM and PM for sleep, and not knowing that there's a little bit of acetaminophen stacked in each of those products. And so the FDA had to actually say, we need to now put a warning on acetaminophen and have people actually look at how much total they're taking on a daily basis, because they're getting liver toxicity. So what's the problem? The problem is this: the black box warning. Now, this is my soapbox. I've been talking about this for decades. And if you read my book, I'll go into great detail. But everybody should learn and know what a black box warning is. A black box warning is that when we take a drug, every drug will be reviewed by the FDA. And you'll have something called a common side effect and a serious side effect. A common side effect for taking a drug, like an ibuprofen, like a naproxen, like an acetaminophen, can be, for example, a little bit of diarrhea, a little bit of constipation, a little bit of heartburn, a little bit of ringing in the ears, a little bit of photosensitivity, a little bit of swelling of the ankles. Okay, so they're the common, a little bit of liver enzyme dysfunction, but it's not dangerous, right? So it's common. It's a nuisance. It's a irritation, but not so dangerous. And so that's a common reaction. And then they have something called a serious reaction. Serious reaction would be something like a heart attack or a stroke or a GI bleed or cancer or some kind of rare allergic reaction. But common things occur commonly and rare things occur rarely. But here's the kicker. Anytime a serious reaction starts to occur commonly, let me repeat that. Anytime a serious reaction starts to occur commonly, meaning anytime a serious reaction that can put you in this black box. So a lot of people think that the black box was just a little black outline on the warning, but what really the FDA is insinuating is that these are warnings that can actually put you in the black box. Okay, so when anything that's serious occurs commonly, the FDA puts a black box warning on that. Now, not every drug has a black box warning, and as an integrative medicine physician, I'm not anti-pharma. I'm a pro-patient, pro-safety, pro-data type of person, right? We use pharmaceuticals all the time in my practice when indicated in a very limited option because it is indicated sometimes and it has wonderful benefits when you know how to use it appropriately. But a lot of drugs, when they have a black box warning, then I sit with my patients who have been taking drugs for a long time, prescribed by their doctors, and we have to have this nice, friendly conversation of looking through all their drugs. And some of them don't have black box warnings, and hooray! Thank God for we have pharmacology and we have those kind of drugs. And then some drugs we have to say, well, guess what? We have to be careful, very cautiously. And can we change your diet, lifestyle? Can we do a lot of these other changes here? Can we fix your microbiome? Look at food sensitivities, lower your stress, change your overall way of habits of being that was lowering your risk of even needing this drug, because over time your risk will be high. Now, a black box warning is also something what we call the get out of jail card for manufacturers. So once there's a black box warning on your drug, and once you get that little packet, even if you went to a gas station or you were in an airport and it's like, oh, I got a headache. I've been sitting in these little chairs. They don't recline back. I've been on a six-hour flight, across the country, LA to New York. My back hurts, my feet hurt. So I'm going to go to the little gift shop. I'm going to buy a little bit of ibuprofen or a little bit of, any of these NSAIDs, naproxen. Once you even tear open that little pack and you swallow that pill, you've accepted the terms and conditions herein that something can happen if there's a black box warning, right? And if it happens to you, you cannot call 1-800-BAD-DRUG. You can't call the number on your screen, which you see very much every day on drugs that have been prescribed for many years. Like, oh, now we're pulling this off the market because it has a problem. The problem with the drugs that are being pulled off the market is that they never had the warning. So then there's liability. But guess what? There is no liability if we preempt the strike. So if they tell you this is what can happen to you, which happens commonly, remember, it's a rare thing, now it's occurring commonly, then they don't have any liability. So if you take an NSAID and you have a problem, there is no liability to any of the manufacturers. And that's why there's so many, over 30 or more different manufacturers of different types of NSAIDs on the market. And we're spending hundreds of billions of prescriptions and over 1/3 of the population taking it daily. Now, what people don't really understand is that NSAIDs have a black box warning. So people think like, oh, black box warning should be on maybe a chemotherapy drug, right? Because it's very strong, it's very toxic, it's killing cancer cells. And so, and people think like, oh yeah, they got chemotherapy and they had a really, really bad reaction. So when we think of black box, people think of that. It's a strong drug. But they don't think about the thing that they're just getting every day over the counter at the grocery store, at the online store, at the pharmacy store, and they're buying it in like 1,000 or 2,000 caplet bottles for maybe 10 or 15 bucks. But the black box warning for NSAIDs are the following. You can have a serious fatal potential heart attack or stroke. It increases the more you use it. It increases if you have cardiovascular disease or cardiovascular disease factors. What does that mean? If you're obese, if you have a little bit more pounds on your belt than you should, which again, most Americans, even during the pandemic, most of us gained a little bit of 15 to 20 pounds on average. If you have a little bit of overweight, obesity, which again, 70% of the population does, that's a risk factor. If you have blood sugar, diabetes, risk. or insulin resistance, which again, almost 70% of the population has, that's a risk factor. If you have high blood pressure, that's a risk factor. If you have elevated cholesterol or heart disease, that is a risk factor. So you can imagine that how many people just with that risk factor are putting themselves at having more risk. Now, the GI risk I mentioned before, you can have a serious, potentially fatal adverse event, including a bleed, an ulcer, a stomach or intestine perforation, meaning just having a hole in the gut. And it can occur anytime during use. And here's the kicker that everybody should listen to: without any warning symptoms, right? So it's not like, a lot of people think like, Dr. Pai, I'm not an ibuprofen junkie. I'm not a naproxen junkie. I don't take it all the time. I only just take it once a month during my menstrual cramp, or, on the weekends when I'm gardening, or I'm cycling on the weekends, or I'm doing my training events. So on my marathon, I only just do that, right before the race or during the race or after when I'm training. So you can just take it as, rarely as once a month and still have this risk. And again, the older you are, especially the data shows over 50, then that risk actually for GI increases even much more. So what I want to teach you today, and just kind of bring you to the idea, because a lot of people think like, well, gosh, it's over the counter. Didn't someone in the government approve of it? Isn't someone say it's safe? Well, the FDA did approve the drug, yes. But just remember, just because the FDA approves the drug doesn't mean that the drug is safe. I mean, here's what I said: the FDA approved drug, and then warning says contains the FDA approved drug, right? So it's kind of an oxymoron, because the FDA is telling you, hey, you can get a heart attack, a stroke, a GI bleed, and perforation. And now we know we can get ulcers, we can get atrial fibrillation, we can get leaky gut, we can get joint degeneration, decreasing our collagen and slowing down our healing processes. And yes, it's been approved. And yes, you can go get it at, the local big box store for 2,000 caplets in a bottle and just take it indefinitely. But then you're being treated for 10, 15 other conditions with other drugs that then also have side effects. So why does this keep getting sold, even if there's a black box warning? Is because of this. The market sizes of the NSAIDs is huge. It's $21 billion. And that's why everybody still sells it. And everybody has a disclaimer, right? So once the disclaimer is on there, you can sell it. And that's why every generic of every brand gets their own ibuprofen or naproxen, for example, or acetaminophen label, because it's 21 billion now, and it's going to increase to 31 billion by the end of this decade. So everybody wants a piece of this pie. Money is driving this, greed is driving this, but what is driving us is to have chronic diseases and then again being prescribed more drugs. So what is the solution? Well, the solution is the following. As many people know, I've been doing this for now 23 years. Part of my expertise and my specialty is looking at natural anti-inflammatories, all the way from the farm to the bench top of doing the scientific research to the bedside of using it clinically. We have used special forms of natural anti-inflammatories, particularly the ones I'm going to speak to you today, more than any other clinic in the United States, and more than most people and more patients that we have followed in the last 23 years. So this is my expertise in the area of how to actually lower inflammation, but how to use the right potency, purity, safety, and efficacy, which is our mantra here at House of Sanjeevani Integrative Medicine Lifestyle Center. How do we give you the right anti-inflammatories that are going to help lower your inflammation systemically, focally, and systemically without having side effects? So I want to mention to you what we call Boswellia SR. It's an all-natural anti-inflammatory. It's fast-acting, long-lasting, safe, and effective. We created it to be the following. It's one-of-a-kind, unique delivery system. And I'll explain how that works in a minute. It's fast-acting, meaning it works within 20 minutes, like a fast tab. Like most people go get their fast Tylenol or a fast Advil or fast Aleve now. We want something. If we had a headache, if we have back pain, we want that immediate response. We don't want to wait an hour and a half or so for something to absorb. And a sustained release to last over 8 hours versus most products, which will have maybe 1 or 2 or 3 hours max. And we use only the patented studied ingredients at the clinical doses. So let's start off with the first ingredient, turmeric and curcumin. And what is the difference? Here's the challenge. Most people, and again, even if you've heard me speak about this before in many lectures, and still to this day, that's why I'm spending so much time on this, the average person doesn't know the difference between turmeric and curcumin. Why? It's not that they're uneducated. is that the marketplace is trying to interchange these in marketing to make them seem like they're the same, but they're not. Turmeric is the root. So turmeric is actually the rhizome, right? It grows on the ground. And then that's where we get the curcumin from this. The curcumin is now 2 to 5% of turmeric. So if we grow, and when we grow, say 100 pounds of turmeric root, when they process it through specific scientific methods, some of them are proprietary. That's why we now have a C3 complex, for example, which was patented. When they remove the curcumin out of that 100 pounds, we will only get then 3 pounds of curcumin. Okay, so it's not the same. So a lot of times now with the online retailers, since the data showing us like which is the Superman and the Wonder Woman molecules of turmeric, which is the curcuminoids, that they will like to use this so people can sell you a generic turmeric powder, which I'll tell you why there's a problem with that. And they'll say turmeric curcumin or curcumin powder, but that's not necessarily true because nobody's regulating it. So most products out there that even use the word curcumin are actually just giving you generic raw curcumin powder. Okay. Now, when we look at the curcuminoids, which are the 3 components that are the most, we call it scientifically the strongest, the safest, the ones that have the most amount of research, it is 3 components. So that's why they call it C3. There's 3 components of those curcuminoids that have been patented to be at a specific ratio. My book will cover that. The product has it at those potencies, at those specific ratios. Now, curcumin has been studied. There's 21,000 publications now on the general ingredient, right? And in fact, when I gave my lecture just like 3 years ago, and I think I showed this slide, it was 16,000, right? So it just shows you how much research is being done, right? No reports of deaths, right? And we can use it as a food. But when you use it as a food, which you should do, you should be eating and incorporating organic turmeric in your diet. But be careful when you just go buy turmeric powder, and I'll explain why in a minute. And be careful that you just say, well, can't I just get turmeric powder and use it? You can. But the problem is you're not going to get usually the highest potency of the curcuminoids that you need to actually drive the inflammation down when you have a chronic serious problem. Eating it is great because we want to add those other curcuminoids. And in fact, in Boswellia, what we do is we've actually calculated how much just generic turmeric powder, all the other components, there's over 100 different molecules outside of the curcuminoids that are in turmeric that also have been shown to be beneficial. What is the minimum amount that is needed in the clinical studies in humans, by the way, to lower inflammation? And we also incorporate that. So we're actually using like specific phytochemicals at the clinical dose, but we're also looking at the whole plant. Right? This is how we kind of formulate things. And everybody says, well, why not just take turmeric? Because I want to be a whole food plant-based diet person. So why not just eat the whole foods? Because we're now turning food into medicine. If you have a headache, you want that headache to go away right now. If you have back pain, you have Crohn's disease, you have rheumatoid arthritis, you want to start reversing that inflammation, reversing the disease and preventing progression. Most of us haven't been eating turmeric all our life. And so if we were incorporating this for decades, our overall inflammatory burden would be less, but now it is much more. So we do have to then make these more potent. Now, curcumin lowers over 100 biological mechanisms of inflammation. I won't go through them here. It's in my book. It's in my previous lectures. But think of when you look at an NSAID is just blocking one pathway, COX-1 or COX-2, for example, right? And here we're blocking over 97. Okay. Now, curcumin and all natural products, by the way, does this, is that as it lowers the inflammation over 100 different mechanisms. So that's why when people take ibuprofen, naproxen, celecoxib, acetaminophen, over time, they actually build tolerance. So aside of it not working and actually causing your joints to get worse and all the things I mentioned before, is that your body builds tolerance because it's just the same pathway, one street. Or here, we're talking about 100 different streets, back alley roads, freeways, side roads, frontage roads. Like we're looking at all the different pathways of lowering inflammation. But it's multi-targeted and mono-targeted. So in my previous lectures and in my book, for those people that have cancer or really bad chronic diseases or on autoimmune drugs or immunosuppressive agents or even chemotherapy agents, you can see here on the side here is that the curcumin has been studied to show the similar effects to all these other kind of drugs like Avastin, Paclitaxel, Gleevec, Herceptin, Remicade, Enbrel, Eterbux, and even, Celebrex, for example. But it's also multi-targeted, meaning it's working on cytokines, which you've all heard from the COVID the last couple of years. This inflammatory cytokine cascade, all these different interleukins and enzymes and growth factors and receptors. It's not just a suppressor. And in fact, it upregulates 202 mRNA transcripts and it downregulates 505. What that means is that it's turning on certain genes that are anti-cancer, that are anti-diabetes, that are anti-heart disease, that are anti-dementia, and it's turning off the ones that actually progress disease. So foods, which is why we want to go on a whole food plant-based diet, and natural products have this ability. Nature's been kind to us. When we kind of do it pharmaceutically, all we know is how to turn it off. And sometimes that's fantastic. We need to turn it off. Someone's, flaring, giving something, calm the flare down, but it's not healing the body or assisting in its biological processes of optimum health. So the gold standard we use again is C3 complex. It's the most studied form in hospitals and universities. And now we have 165 clinical studies. Last year was 165. So just letting you know, we keep on adding more and more. And then we're not just talking about, in a rat or in a dog. Now we're talking about, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4 studies, right? And we're now looking at synergy between these things like curcumin C3 complex and in our Boswellia, what we're looking at in studies, and the use of certain prescription drugs. So can we now look at adding these kind of ingredients to a chemotherapy agent and lowering the side effects and making the chemotherapy or immunotherapy or whatever therapy more beneficial and less detrimental? And we can. Before we used to say, don't take any of these things. And what we do in our practice, just letting you know, when I see a patient, and we still like to see patients and we can do consultations, health coaching, and everything online now, we like to look at each drug and we like to look at what's the interaction, and some things you shouldn't be taking with certain drugs, and certain things we're going to teach you that, hey, how do you reduce the side effect and get you a better outcome of your therapy is by doing some combinations. And this is where my specialty is. And most, oncologists and most practitioners will say, don't take any natural therapies when you're taking these drugs. And most kind of people on the holistic side of natural will say, hey, take everything that's not going to harm you. And that's not true. You have to understand how the pharmacology works, how the physiology works, how the immunology works, how the microbiome works. And then we can provide excellent, excellent outcomes. The C3 complex has no heavy metals, no solvents. It's not synthetic. There's no nanoparticles. It's not irradiated. All the ingredients in Boswellia is non-irradiated. Everything since 9/11 that comes from outside the United States is irradiated before it comes into the country. What that means is it goes through the machine that we sterilize like surgical equipment, and it actually knocks down the biological activity of the plant. Why? Because we're afraid of bioterrorism and other contaminants that can cause, illnesses. The problem is that then we're losing the physical activity of the plant, just like putting spinach in a microwave, right? So what you have to understand is that we go through all the means and processes. That's why it's a little bit more expensive, because our products are not irradiated. We want to ensure that potency of the plant, but then we have to go through layers and layers and layers of auditing and testing to make sure that it doesn't have solvents, heavy metals. It doesn't have any of these other aspects. And it's the only curcumin that actually has GRAS status. If you don't know what that is, Google that up and you'll understand what that is. Most companies will kind of lead in to say, hey, we have GRAS status, but they actually don't. There's very few companies that actually have GRAS status on their products. Now, again, 185 clinical studies. Why that's important? Because when we look at all the other brand name competitors, right? So when people go say, hey, I go to there's a doctor's brand, or reps come to doctor's office or practitioners' offices, and they're selling something. Hey, I see this in the store and it has some data. These are some of the examples here. You can see here them on the screen here. I won't read them out loud, but these are the other brands. They'll say, hey, we have studies, right? But they're limited. They're actually in test tubes, most of them. And they're like little pilot studies, mainly white papers. White papers like an advertorial. It's scientific. It's nice. We learn from that. But it's still an advertorial. It's not a clinical study. It's not a clinical trial. It's not actually showing anything else in terms of just this is maybe how it works, or how it works maybe in a test tube or a rat. Now, the biggest challenge that we've seen in the last 10 years is that everybody wants to find a better, faster, quicker, right? So they want to claim 29, 45, 65, 128, 277 times more absorption of curcumin, right? But what they're finding out, and when you analyze those studies, they're actually measuring what they call metabolites. When curcumin goes into the gut, it actually converts to 8 metabolites. And what they're measuring, a gluconoride, has been shown to be not inflammatory or having physiological any effects, right? The body sometimes makes a lot of byproduct, and some of them are important, and some of them are just waste products. And they're measuring this waste product and then claiming that it has more absorption. So what that allows them to do is give you less product, have a higher margin on that, for the patient thinking that they're getting something that's going to be 200 times better, but in fact, higher absorption does not equal higher efficacy, right? And that's why we like to stick to the science, stick to what actually clinically works. And when most people try these things, doesn't mean that they're terrible or dangerous per se. It just means that they don't get the benefit that they're actually investing their money to paying out of pocket for. Now, when you say, what about all these other products? I mean, these are all the products that if you were to go in the major online retailer right now, these are all the things that if you said, let me type in curcumin, these are all the products that are come up plus more. None of them have any safety or clinical data. Now, why is that a problem? This is the problem. Because in addition to this growth marketing, is this growing 157 million by a few more years, ground turmeric, right? And you probably saw last year, I saw about 2 months ago, and then two reports were last year. Ground turmeric is a large source of lead exposure in the United States. Why? Because when they get generic turmeric powder, which is most, by the way, right? There's only a couple of large suppliers in China and in India, is that the rhizome, remember, it's a root product, the little grinder that spins and kind of grinds the skin off of the turmeric itself, that has the lead, because it's just big machinery that they're doing industrial processing, and that contaminates. So most people are like, I go buy something for $19.95, for $29.95, for $30, and some products are even $8. It says turmeric curcumin powder and all. Those things have a high likely, if not when they've tested them, to have heavy metals. Now, again, most of them are not certified pesticide free. What does that mean? As a rhizome in the ground, root crops are heavily sprayed. Ginger and turmeric are heavily sprayed. That's why when you go to the store and you go buy, say, an organic turmeric root, it could be like $21 per pound. It's expensive. Now, if you think of it's $21 per pound, and only curcumin is 3% of that pound, and then we got to extract that out and then put it in capsules and give you, 500 milligrams and so many capsules per day. How can a product be $4? How can the product be $18? It can't. It's not real. Okay. 43%. This is a big problem that we have. 43%, and this is a study that was published, of the largest supplier to the United States was found to be selling synthetic curcumin. So why is everybody selling curcumin, say, online or on Instagram or on social media? Because it's super cheap now. But how is it super cheap? I just told you how expensive it is to get organic turmeric root and then try to extract it out. It's because it's now can be synthetically made in the laboratory. Every week, I get an email from China and India from suppliers because they know, Dr. Pai, you're the curcumin. You're the guy who's been doing this the most. Hey, buy our synthetic molecule because it's not regulated and it's still a curcuminoid. It's just one of these three, but it's not even at the right ratio. The problem with the synthetics is it has solvents and has other chemicals and also can cause severe reactions. Like people can take it and get dermatitis and get diarrhea and actually exacerbate their symptoms. But again, this is a supplement industry. It's not regulated. So this is the problem. Most people buy cheap supplements. And that's why a lot of doctors on this show, on this panel of Real Truth About Health, they're kind of anti-supplement. I understand where they're coming from because, look, it's all over the place and nobody's educating what to look for. But when we do have options that are studied and patented, we should be educating our patient on, hey, you should be eating plant-based diet. But when you still have a headache or back pain, don't go for an NSAID, go for a Boswellia. Now, what happened was about 3 years ago, we wanted to look at of these suppliers. So aside of the synthetic curcumin, we're looking at what about taking the top 5 suppliers. So a university said, hey, let's take the top 5 suppliers of 95% curcuminoids, right? Because that's what everybody's looking for on a label. And it sounds the same, like 95% curcuminoids, but they're not telling you about how much or what. It just says 95%. So almost all products now, if they're trying to be a little bit smart or fancy marketing, they'll say 95% curcuminoids. So they took those top 5 manufacturers. These are so there's 5 big manufacturers, which then makes thousands of different products, right? Because that's how it works in supply chain, right? There's going to be a manufacturer that makes a base product, they sell the raw product, and there's hundreds and hundreds of factories and facilities that will then make their own brand name or private label your brand name. And when they did the study in the animal model, and they're looking at, what is the anti-inflammatory effects of it, because they all say 95% curcuminoids, not all curcuminoids available were equal. In fact, the only one that showed to be clinically effective was the C3 complex that is found in Boswellia. And be careful of the newer forms. There's a newer forms, like a lot of people are now getting into turmeric oils and now even worse as nanoparticles. And the nanoparticles, even in the pharmaceutical trials, have been shown to be quite dangerous. And that's why the trials have been very limited, because in the animal studies, it's caused damage. In fact, all the animals died in the study. So you got to be careful when people are trying to use words like nano, which, first of all, most supplement companies can't even make a nanoparticle, and the turmeric oils, which a lot of people think of essential oils. And yes, there's part of the turmeric has that turmeric oil, but actually since I think it was 2010 or 2012, the data was showing that turmeric oils actually can be more irritating and cause some pro-inflammatory issues. The second ingredient I want to talk about is Boswellia, or frankincense, right? Commonly known, like most people remember, that the gift that was taken to baby Jesus from the Magi was frankincense, myrrh, and gold. I write about this heavily in my book. And then, many years ago, when I brought this up at certain conferences, actually I was interviewed by a Christian television network maybe 15 years ago. And I kind of brought back this idea of like, well, guess what? Frankincense, Boswellia, and the whole country and 3 manufacturers have been selling out ever since, because they keep on replaying the Christmas special that I was interviewed in. But the interesting thing is that we have to understand where this is coming from, right? These are Ayurvedic medicines that we've been using for thousands of years. There's now over 700 publications, again, mainly in the past 5 years. And I think a year ago was about 600. So there's about 100 more since I spoke about this last time. Now, the benefits, again, lowers the inflammation. I won't go into all the detail. That's in my book. That's in my previous lectures. And it has wonderful effects on most tissues, from joints to the breast to the bone and colon and lung and prostate and muscle tissue. And so there's a benefit of the frankincense. In fact, even when we burn frankincense, like let me go back here, when we burn frankincense, say like in church, there's a reason the studies will show that's when they burn the frankincense, that gum resident, it actually will convert the brain on a PET scan or a functional MRI. It turns on the place of the brain where we feel the most calm and safe. And that's why they use it in church, because that was a place to feel safe, like a sanctuary that you can go. So it's very interesting. There's actually a historical benefit of actually emotional and physiological to be in a place of feeling calm when you're actually breathing the smoke. Now, the problems with Boswellia supplements is that most contain just plain Boswellia. It's not, Boswellia, when we look at plant medicines, the challenge is, and that's why most people are not trained in herbal medicine, but herbalists will always be talking about this, right? Those people who specialize in herbalized medicine, they understand, or we're trained and we're taught that. Like, there's different parts of the plant, right? You got the roots, you got the bark, you got the gum, you got the flower, you got the leaves, you got the berries of all these different plants. And when they say this is the plant, you don't know what it's coming from. And so a lot of companies will say, well, it's Boswellia, but what part of the tree are we talking about? It's actually the gum resin is what we're looking for. And most people are taking other parts of the plant. So it's not a mislabel. Partly it is. So true, it's Boswellia, it's the plant, but it's not the right part of the plant. Just like we can say coffee. Well, is it the coffee berry, or is it the coffee of the tree, or the coffee bark and a coffee leaf, for example? There's other parts of that we can actually just say it is and not be fully lying, but in a way they are giving you a little bit of mistruth. Most of the Boswellia is not standardized. It only contains boswellic acids. And if you just raise boswellic acids, it took us 6 years when we were doing the R&D for Bosmeric, and we would take the parts of the Boswellia, AKBBA, boswellic acids, and I'll talk about this polysol in a second, but it took us 6 years because we would increase the dose and the percentage of those numbers. And so we say, hey, let's turn up to 90%. Let's give me 90% AKBBA, which is a component. It's kind of like the curcumin of the Boswellia. Let's turn it to 90%. Because it sounds good, right? More is better. But we found out in the studies that it didn't have a stronger effect. We're trying to mimic biologically what nature has given us. And so over time, we were raising and lowering each of these ratios, like all 3 up, some of them down, some of them up. It took a long time. And that's why when you look at Boswellia and you say, why do they have this specific ratio? Why is this high, but this is a little bit lower? Because physiologically, it has the better effect. Unlike what we would come to start with. We thought like, hey, let's turn I play music. Most people know that they're calling me the rock doc, right? So side of the curcumin, I'm the rock doc. So everybody likes to say, well, let's turn it up to 10. It's the music thing on it, turn up the amp. But turning everything up does not necessarily mean better outcome. And so the goal is understanding the fine nuance of plant medicines and also response to plant medicines. Now, a lot of people will also take essential oils and marketing companies talking about Boswellia. I won't get into the data on that, but most of those things are adulterated. Most of them are taking data of the other part. The essential oil is a different part of Boswellia than the gum resin that we're using in our studies, or the most studies that are showing the benefits of the product. Not saying that an essential oil is bad to use, but you can't claim that the physiological benefits when it's actually has different physiological constituents. So we use the gold standard. It's called Boswellian PS. Now, why we add the PS? Because we're the only company now that has also the polysol aspect. The polysol has a water-soluble fraction that provides us this 20-minute onset of action, meaning you take it within 20 minutes, bam, headache goes down. Inflammation goes down, right? So no other company right now worldwide has the polysol fraction or the AKBBA or the boswellic acids at that optimized ratio to actually enhance the overall anti-inflammatory effect of Boswellia. And again, we are able to provide it. And again, we do have GRAS status. Now, ginger is my third ingredient. I love ginger. People should be eating ginger. It's a great food additive. It makes everything taste better. There's now 5,100 publications we've been using in Ayurvedic and Chinese medicine, and it's used throughout the world in culinary foods. Ginger has wonderful benefits as an anti-inflammatory, lowers inflammation directly, has a lot of benefits on the gut, right? Lowers nausea, lowers vomiting. It also helps prevent a lot of types of cancer and even chemo and radiative protective properties. So it's very helpful when people are going through cancer treatments to be consuming like ginger tea. Again, organic. It's a rhizome. It's heavily sprayed, right? And it basically has been studied in most of the tissues as well. But the problem with the ginger supplements out there is it's just ginger root powder, right? So anytime you see ginger, 500 milligrams, ginger, 250 milligrams, or 1,000 milligrams of ginger, it's just ginger root powder, which is heavily sprayed. It's not organic, number one. They're not certified pesticide free. And then again, they're irradiated. So it's losing its effectiveness. What we want to look at, what is the curcuminoids? What's the AKBBA of ginger? Like what is the Superman Wonder Woman of ginger is what they call gingerols. Gingerols are the component that makes the ginger more effective, right? It's like the curcuminoids of it. Now, if you're standardizing, if you got a product that says just ginger extract, 500 milligrams, ginger, 200 milligrams, right? Then it's not worth taking. Just eat some ginger, because literally what you can buy would be a cleaner product, meaning all organic, and it won't be irradiated, it won't be full of pesticides, and would actually have some better biological activity. Now, here's the kicker. Ginger, proteolytic enzymes, bromelain, papain, nattokinase. These are all different ingredients that you will hear that are given in joint formulas, right? Ginger, proteolytic enzymes, nattokinase, bromelain, papain, for example, okay? So why I'm saying this, because when you put those ingredients in a capsule, it will degrade the potency of all the other ingredients in the capsule over time. So this is the whole market. Every product has ginger in it almost, right? Because we know the benefits of ginger. Everybody kind of understands it's a common thing. It has little side effects. So it's great. We can take it. The problem is, as that capsule has been manufactured, as it sits in that bottle, by the time that person actually gets it, that potency has been degraded. It lowers over time, so it's less effective. And so we will then show you how we overcome that problem. We use gingerol at 20% in Boswellia. It's the highest available worldwide. Most, if you find a product out there that says ginger extract and it says 5% gingerols, fantastic. You actually got a better product than most out there. But we go even further than that. Ours has the highest amount. Usually the highest amount you can find is 11%. In Europe, we use 20% gingerols. Why? Because we're driving down that inflammatory response. And the interesting thing is that it has gastroprotective effects as well. So a lot of people think that ginger is really spicy or pungent. It does have a little bit of a heat, but the heat is not something that will cause an ulcer. In fact, it's gastroprotective. It actually helps prevent the GI tract from having ulcers. That's why we like to drink ginger tea. Even for chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, FDA has approved drinking ginger tea, right? So this is really important. Again, our ginger extract certified pesticide-free and free of irradiation. Then I want to get into black pepper. Now, black pepper is used in almost every culture around the world. It's almost on every single table in every restaurant, right? Now there's 2,500 studies published. It's called piperine. That's the molecule here. And all the other slides, I was always putting the chemistry molecule for those who are interested in that. But pepper is interesting because a lot of people think of it as a spice. But, you know, I'm doing a series that you might have seen on YouTube called Healing Spices. And I'm covering the 4 spices every month on the benefits of spices. And black pepper is interesting because it is also a natural anti-inflammatory. We all understood black pepper and bioperine, which is the one form that we use that's patented, as it increases nutrient absorption. Okay, meaning that when you take black pepper, it increases the absorption of other ingredients. That's why there's black pepper on your table. You crush the black pepper, not only to improve the taste of the food, right? But actually it helps the digestion and the body absorb all those nutrients. But what we didn't really truly understand until the last 10, 15 years is that it has strong anti-inflammatory effects. It lowers all sorts of things, helps with cancer-lowering NF-kappa beta COX2 enzymes, again, like the NSAIDs do without the side effects, and even assists with cognitive brain functioning. You know, even sniffing in some of these oils actually can improve cognitive functioning as well. Has a great antioxidant effect as well. So the problem with black pepper supplements is that most products, again, are just black pepper powder, just like going to the store and buying, you know, the generic spice. It's not standardized to 95% piperine. And when it's not the bioperine, then again, like the curcuminoids, they can say it's 95%, but it's not guaranteed to have any of those compounds at that ratio, right? They're not pesticide free, they're irradiated. And there's a big myth or a misnomer that's been perpetrated by companies who don't want to use black pepper, or, you know, because if they don't add one more ingredient, then they have more product margin. So there's a big myth that's been pushed out there that, oh my God, black pepper can cause problems. It can interact with your medications and it can cause liver issues. And that's all myth, okay? Because the FDA is not pulling off black pepper of your table. They're not pulling off the store for you to put all you want. People are having peppercorn and pepper encrusted foods every day. They're cooking with pepper and all these spices. And so that's just, you know, always step back when you hear like, oh my God, this is really dangerous. I'm like, but you just ate it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner on some level for the last 50 years. You haven't had a problem with that. So be careful of that kind of misguidance of sometimes dangerous aspects of foods. Those are just people that are trying to do scare tactics to try to sell you a cheaper form of, say, curcumin or Boswellia. So we use the gold standard, that's bioperine, is standardized to 95% piperine. Again, bioperine is the name, and again, it's the most clinically studied form. In the studies using bioperine, it increases the other ingredients 30 to 2,000%. So curcumin is increased 2,000%, only if you're using C3 complex and only if you're using bioperine. No one else can say that. Now, you'll see everybody say increasing. If you go online now, you say increases, because they'll just put generic black pepper and generic turmeric saying it's curcumin and say increases up to 200%. That's absolutely false. They cannot make that claim, right? Because they can't prove it. Everybody's trying to steal other people's data. And again, the internet cannot regulate. Okay, but in the studies using actually bioperine, and when we use it in our product, Boswellia, we can actually show 30% up to 2,000% of the other ingredients. Again, certified pesticide-free, non-irradiated, and also the only black pepper extract patented that has GRAS status. Now, Boswellia is our flagship formula. It is our go-to to replace the ibuprofen. It has all 4 ingredients I talked about: curcumin, C3 complex, Boswellia, PS, ginger, and the black pepper bioperine. But at the clinical doses, and more importantly, at specific ratios of even the Boswellia and the gingerols that have a stronger effect. It's actually important to understand that we putting this together I mean, when I say we, this is me, a bunch of scientists, and again, 6 years of R&D. Now, we've had this product out for 12 years. We have tens of thousands of patients who have taken this worldwide with success, and we're continue to grow the market. We keep also getting copied, and people are trying to, do pseudo products on the market, but they don't have the same clinical efficacy. They might be cheaper, but to me, cheap is not necessarily good, right? You can get a dollar value meal. It's not real food. Right. So there's a certain aspect of, if you want safety, efficacy, potency, and purity, you got to be looking at what the product or what you're delivering. But what we have analyzed is, instead of just giving a single of each of these, which a lot of companies will say, hey, I just get curcumin C3 complex, or I just get the Boswellia PS, or I just get ginger, or everybody will add black pepper to them, is that we have something called synergy. So now we understand that when we add those 4 ingredients together, right? And we actually did studies where we actually had 1 and 2, and then this one with that one. So we kind of played this ABCD game of mixing. When you put them all 4 together, there was even a higher benefit, right? So then actually you can cut down on some of the dosing. So you don't have to take large doses as synergy. Once you understand plant medicines, you can understand that's why Ayurvedic medicine and Chinese medicine, they always use formula. They weren't always just like, here's one ingredient, like pharmaceuticals. Here's one ingredient, here's a large dose of it. They're always looking at, how can we balance something that we can lower the potential issue of tolerance and also lower potential issue of side effect, and something that you can continue to take daily, continuously, without, again, burning it out or causing a problem. So when we look at Boswellia, which is this, it's a bilayered caplet, versus a capsule, which everybody else uses. Now, why would that be important? It's the following. This is where technology and science and pharmacology is important. We have 2 layers, and this is kind of the science. And a lot of people are like, I don't understand why you're talking about this. This is so important, because when you put the right ingredients, it's a bilayer. There's 2 layers, and even of that, it's layered. Is because we need to have this 20-minute onset of action when you take it. Part of it's going to be released, and then we also have the sustained release action over 8 hours. Now, again, with the ginger, bromelain, papain, nattokinase, proteolytic enzymes, when those companies put it in a capsule, that capsule, again, will degrade the potency of those ingredients over time. Okay, so that the potency is not retaining, meaning the efficacy, how well it works as it sits on the shelf for several months from manufacturing to the time it's distributed, by the time it goes to the warehouse, by the time you order online to be delivered to your house, it is lowering every week. Ours is being kept 100% of the potency, of the purity. We're providing safety and efficacy at the time that you take it, whenever you take it. And so if it's sitting in the bottle, doesn't matter. Once you take it, we're getting 100%. That's when we look at clinical efficacy. And that's why we have the flagship of lowering inflammation. Now, when we talk about this kind of fast acting, long lasting, a lot of companies will say, ours is fast, ours works long. That's not true. What we look at is this. There's what we call a therapeutic range in the body, that the body gets the best physiological benefit. And then we look at, the concentration, and we look at time over hours. And what we've provided, that when we look at capsule products, which is every other product on the market that has turmeric, Boswellia, turmeric, curcumin, Boswellia, ginger, black pepper, combinations of those in between, is that when they eat it here in this gray color here, it goes up in the absorption, right? So it starts to peak within about an hour, and then it goes up, and then it kind of comes down. By actually the 3rd hour, we've lost the efficacy, meaning like we don't notice any difference. And that's why when people take those other capsule products, they have to take tons and tons. And when people even took the right product, say they took C3 complex in the studies by itself, say for cancer or chronic disease, the people were taking grams and grams of that. Why? It's because they were doing this. They're going up, down, up, down, up, down. Then you're just taking a lot of product. Not dangerous, just quite expensive and inconvenient. What we now can do is this, that when we have that Boswellia PS, it actually peaks in the blood here, starts to dissolve, starts to break up. You have a 20-minute onset of action due to the water-soluble aspect, again, lowering the inflammatory response. And then, since it's bilayered, no other company has a bilayered sustained release technology right now. It's actually a pharmaceutical technology, is that it then lasts over 8 hours in the therapeutic range. So you want to take something, have that immediate release, but you also want to be like, I don't have to keep taking it over and over and over again. And that's what we can do with Boswellia SR. It's easy to swallow. It's a caplet. So it's not a tablet, it's smaller, and it's not a capsule. Why? Because we want to prevent and we want to retain the potency, and we want to prevent degradation that occurs in capsules. So 1 to 2 twice a day. Again, even people with an acute migraine headache can take 3 at one time, for example, or back pain, no problems. And one of the most important things is purity and safety. So ours is non-irradiated, it's gluten-free, soy-free, has no pesticides, no synthetic molecules. And in fact, again, remember, 43% of all turmeric curcumin now are made from synthetic molecules. We have no nanoparticles, and we are tested for having no lead or other types of heavy metals. Now, we've done such a good job over the last 12 years. Now, other companies, now again, I'm just a small doc here in Albuquerque with my company doing integrative medicine, but even large corporations are now coming and saying, hey, can we hijack my trademark name and sell it, right? So people will click on this and actually be taken to a generic synthetic curcumin or a curcumin of some form that may not have as much data, maybe again, 20 studies, maybe white papers, maybe again in cell culture. But this is how we have to be careful. Like when it's very difficult as a true clinician to expand in the market when even Amazon, for example, they won't allow me even to post the study on the 43% synthetic curcuminoids in my A-listing content. Why? Because they make 30% of all the product that they're selling in the category. So what happens is patients think like, oh, if I go to an online retailer, I'm getting a good source or it's a free market. But actually what they don't realize it's being skewed because nobody wants to shake the boat. Nobody wants to say, hey, if everybody's getting a little bit of less of potency or purity or safety and they're not efficacious, they don't care. Everybody's still making money. And we want to provide that benefit to you. And I want to just kind of, before we end right now, I want to talk about that, when we just last year and the year before, we actually have 2 of these. I was only able to pull up 1 today, but during the pandemic, I gave my lecture on 2021 from COVID to cancer, how to lower inflammation naturally. And, we talked about the pathways. We talked about, that's also somewhat in my book about pathways of inflammation and other viruses. But when COVID hit, a lot of people were like, well, what can I do? I'm going to take the vaccine. I'm going to do other things. I'm going to eat plant-based, lowering 76% of inflammatory complications just by the diet, which did better than the 3rd vaccine. So like just lowering your inflammation by eating better is better for you, how to get vitamin D up and all. But we did something even more. We actually have double-blinded randomized control clinical trials. We actually now have 2. This is just one of them. And we're using the curcumin C3 complex and the bioprene. And it did very well for mild, moderate, severe symptoms. And it's used and now as adjunctive therapy for COVID in India. So this is something that, when people say, well, put it to the test, let's take a look. Well, we have put it to test. This is the gold standard, right? So the idea is that we can take natural ingredients and use it scientifically and do the right appropriate manufacturing. The problem is most people in the marketplace don't want to do that, but we do, and that's what we can provide to you. So my goal for you, my recommendation is to take action now before you take ibuprofen. Try this instead. You can go to bosmeric.com and learn more about this ingredients, how it compares to other products, how it works. And also you can go to Sanjevani Store, which is also our online store for our clinic. You don't have to be a patient, but I'm glad to see patients from anywhere around the world. We do online health coaching and consultations, and we can send laboratory kits and testing, and we do everything from afar, but we've been helping people for chronic inflammatory aspects for over 2 decades very successfully. And hopefully you can also check out my book, Anti-Inflammation Nation, so that you can get a better understanding of how to prevent and treat all diseases through diet, lifestyle, and the use of natural anti-inflammatories, including Bosmeric. And I want to thank you all for taking your time this morning to listen to my lecture.
The next part of our session here is going to be question and answer. And in order to do that, I just want to let everybody know exactly how that we're going to do that. So, but before we begin the Q&A, I know you just mentioned your book. Do you want to show? I don't know if you have access to your website, or let us know exactly where to find you on social media and where to get your books at.
Yeah, so you can get our book at sanjevanistore.com, SANJEVANI store, STOR.com. You can get the book there and get a signed copy from myself if you like, or you can go to Amazon and purchase it on Amazon, or you can even get on Audible. It's 14 hours professionally read. So for those people who like to commute or working out and they want to listen to like how to change their lifestyle and not just what I talked about today, but we talk about all sorts of things from food allergies, microbiome, environmental stress, other kind of technologies and other lifestyle practices. Everything we talk about is evidence-based. So as everybody will know, and then what I'm really, kind of critical about the industry is that, we like to put it to the test, and we do. We like to demonstrate the use of natural therapies from whatever culture it is, and then encourage people to then incorporate them into their lifestyle. The challenges in this natural world, as you know, and in the internet and social media marketing, is that everybody's an expert and everybody's selling something. But at the end of the day, the data will fall short on the efficacy and safety of those things. And then nobody, since they're not really seeing patients at the end of the day, then there's no kind of follow-up of how they actually did. As a practitioner doing this for 23 years, now we can see like how wonderful these lifestyle changes are, how changing your diet to plant-based is important, and how using some natural therapies can also augment that and accelerate that healing.
Thank you for that. So we're going to do, for the Q&A, we're going to accept questions from the audience. I'm going to put everyone's hand down right now because I think we have one from last time. So if you have a question, please raise your hand in Zoom. We're not going to take questions directly from the chat. So if you'd like to ask a question, you should go to the bottom of your Zoom, and second from the left, you will see a reactions button. You're going to click on the reactions button, and from that pop-up, you will select raise hand, and I will answer, or excuse me, I will open up the mic for you in the order in which I received them. Once I do, I will ask you to state your name, where you're from, and state your question. We will, in order to move things quickly along, we ask that your questions are brief and on topic. Once you ask the question, we will then mute you in order to give everyone a chance to get their question answered. We won't be taking follow-up questions. So, however, if you do want to ask a follow-up question, you can, after I put your hand down, you can go ahead and put your hand back up. And if we have time, we can ask a question. You can ask a question again. So let me ask you you mentioned when you just right about now, you mentioned about environmental factors contributing to inflammation. And I'm going to ask you more about food factors, but what kind of environmental factors should we be avoiding in our everyday life?
So we always want to be eating, as I say, cleaner, right? But so getting more organic, particularly when we talk about plant foods, I always like to start with my patients with kind of I'm a risk reductionist, not a perfectionist. So I start with first, like, go to environmental working group, look at the dirty dozen. Those foods must be organic because those are the top 12 most heavily sprayed foods right now. I'm not talking about animal protein, because animal proteins is all their problem altogether, right? Even if it's clean, right? But we want to look at, because most people are on a budget, most people, with the economy and inflation, it's like, so we got to be tight with our money. What can we get our biggest return on investment? We'll eat the foods that are the most heavily sprayed. Those ones must be organic. So pay a little 10 cents per pound for that on the environmental working group, the dirty dozen. You can look that up now. Other things we want to look at. The second thing that we see with most of our patients, since we do testing for that, is we look at toxic elements. And those are things like heavy metals. And unfortunately, right now, you don't have to live in Flint, Michigan to have a toxicity. Most people, when we look at, again, you can go to environmental working group, EWG, water database. These are all nonprofit companies, and you just put in your zip code and it will tell you, like, these are the chemicals that are coming from your municipal water. Right now, municipal is safe, meaning you won't get diarrhea, you won't get E. coli. It's gone through the filtration, but they can't filter out all the prescription drugs and chemicals. Like here in Albuquerque, we have 525 or 585 times more arsenic in our water. We have 3.8 times more uranium in our water. This is all, every place that you live have industry, environmental. Some of it's natural, some of it's man-made. But these are the chemicals that come back into our environment. Those chemicals can potentially cause cancer, cause inflammation, neurodegenerative disease, immunosuppression, et cetera. So we look at also cleaning water, right? So like making sure that you have like a reverse osmosis or gravity filter. Tomorrow I'm going to talk about wellness technologies. So where do you go further than that? So once you filtered your water, how do you make the water then healthier? Right? People are like, what is that? Well, wait for tomorrow's lecture. But those are other things. So cleaning up your environment, body products. I have a whole section in my book. The average person's like 13 to 16 products a day, from, body sprays and lotions and lipsticks and all stuff. That's another chemical exposure that, people will be surprised, particularly women will be surprised how much stuff is in their lipstick and their makeup. And as you can see, there's a trend now. People are trying to get cleaner products, less ingredients. It shouldn't have, just like our food, shouldn't have 50 ingredients that we cannot pronounce. As a PhD chemist, we don't really know. It's like, why is this putting on, my skin's your largest organ. Why am I putting this stuff on my body? So we always want to look at those things. And lastly, in my book, I spend a good time about is how do we look at the environmental stress of inflammation, right? The emotional inflammation. So we'll talk about meditation, and we talk about mindfulness, and we talk about, other types of practice like yoga and even community. How do we also lower the inflammation from the burden of the stress that everybody's been going through the last couple of years?
So just real quickly, what was that website again for the water, your municipal water?
Environmental Working Group. Just type EWG water database in the search engine, and people can look up that. And it's really important because one thing you'll notice that most people, not everybody, but most people have some kind of carbon filter in their house, right? They have the little thing that goes in the back of the refrigerator, the little thing goes, or the little thing on the bottom of the carbon filter on the bottom of the refrigerator, or they have like a, I don't want to say brand names, but like a Brita or a Pure, for example. Those are carbon filters. And if you look at on the data on your screen from what you put in, you'll see that sometimes that carbon filter will filter out everything that is toxic that was high in that person's area from their municipal. And you'll also see that on some places it's not. So they're thinking that it's filtering all this stuff and it's taking out, say, maybe lead or mercury, but it's not taking out the uranium or the arsenic or the tungsten or something else that might be coming in, or platinum, for example. And so then it'll show you like reverse osmosis or a gravity filter will do that. They're not telling you which one to get. They're just telling you which technology, in terms of filtration. And that's key because you really want to be buying the one that is for you, not just necessarily that the internet influencer or the store has it on sale. You want to be like, and if whichever is the cheapest that does it, then that's fine for me. Like I have no issue with that. To me, it's like a lot of people are buying filters because they're said, hey, it's supposed to be cleared. Like someone says it clears everything, but then when they actually look at it, it's like, no, when we test them and if they're toxic or elevated, that means it's still sneaking in. The other aspect I have to remind everybody, because there's a study just came out about 4 months ago showing that some people with filters are getting higher toxicity. And the reason being is because they don't change their filters frequently, right? Like during the pandemic, we forgot to do a lot of things, of the stress and all. And a lot of people forget because, now they have like apps or other ways to kind of notify people like, hey, you need to change the filter. But what happens is the filter will build up all the toxins because it's filtering it. But then if they don't change the filter appropriately on time, then it starts to spill. And then people can actually get a higher toxicity because they just built it up and then starts to dump. So make sure whatever filter you get, make sure that you put your regular thing on your calendar to go back and change it. I have to have my little post-it notes and my little thing on my phone to remind me because it's key. Like you want to clean water, but you don't want to have clean water for 6 months and then start dumping and then all of a sudden get toxicity.
I literally just did that yesterday. Put it in my calendar.
Yeah. So you have to do that because these are things that, because, they're in the garage or under the sink or whatever, we kind of have a tendency to forget it. When I talk about tomorrow, the wellness technologies, that's going to be important because that's going to taking your health to another level of energizing the water, structuring the water, taking the trauma out of the water. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, listen to tomorrow's lecture.
Well, great. I look forward to it myself. So when people think about water, they think about drinking water. You mentioned that skin is the largest organ in the body. Mm-hmm. How about when you're taking a shower, right? How important is it to also filter that water? So
that's a challenge, right? Because I want to first look at the water that someone drinks, right? Because we're actually internally getting the exposure. Yeah, yes, it's true, right? So I always first start with my patients, like get something that you're drinking first is your priority. Now, if you have the availability, then later on you want to get like a whole house filter. Right. But even of the whole house filters, you should get your water tested, which you can do because there's different filters for that. When a patient calls with me, then I'll say, here are the different brands that we use. I have nothing in relationship to them, but like these are the ones that you can get at the store. But some of them are going to be taking out more like iron. If you have high iron, or some of these, there's different sediments that are higher in certain areas that you want to make sure, again, even on that, since it's going to be more expensive because they're larger units, the one that we have in our house lasts about 8 to 10 years, right? But we have like higher iron content in the area of Albuquerque that we live. So we get little red stains, on the sink. So we had to put that in, right? And also that would be too much toxicity drinking 8 to 10 glasses of water a day. But every city, every town is different. The other thing that people need to know is that also a lot of Americans, a lot of my patients also, when they live rurally, they use well water. But we have to have well water tested because a lot of times they say, oh, it was just tested, but it was just tested to make sure that it doesn't have bacteria. They're not testing for all these other things, just like municipal is not cleaning it all out. So a lot of people say, oh, I got you need to have it tested for all these other types of contaminants, especially if we do a testing and it comes back positive, then the number one source is that. I would always recommend a whole house filter if you can. Now, sometimes when that gets expensive, then they even just have like little things that go in the shower. Like even if it's a carbon filter, it's not perfect, But guess what? If you can remove at least 80% or 90%, and we're taking showers, again, skin number one organ, then yes. And most people will feel with any kind of house filter, their skin is a lot less itchy and dry because it's not getting that high, heavy chlorine and fluorides and all these other chemicals. And also the smell will be better. And also they notice, like, especially when they use a whole house filter, that their clothes and everything, there's less detergent they have to use because it's a softer water. I recommend not using water softeners that you have to add salt, like the old-fashioned ones that we all grew up with, the pellets and stuff. They now have ones that are made out of coconut shells and different kind of carbon and natural filters that soften the water without adding the salt. Because then when you add the salt, then people have to worry about blood pressure problems in the drinking water.
So we just spoke about how to avoid getting some of these toxins into our body. But we've all been exposed to a wild amount of environmental toxins, from our food as well as from just living in this toxic world. How do you suggest we go about detoxifying ourselves?
Sure. So one of the things that we do when I see a patient, and again, we're open always to consultations, go to sanjevani.net, SANJEVANI.net, make an appointment. What we do is that we first test for the toxicity, right? Because if there's toxicity, then there's protocols of things doing naturally. But it's not just doing some kind of detox that most people think. You have to actually evaluate the patient's microbiome. Most people have some kind of intestinal increased permeability, leaky gut, or dysbiosis. If they have any of these gut imbalances, then if they were to do a detox before that's fixed, which most people do, it's actually more damaging because they're actually then grabbing the heavy metals or the toxic elements or nutrients and actually goes back and it recycles in the body. This is the kind of complexity, but the nuance of having clinical practice than being a social media influencer. People are like, oh, let's do this detox. Okay. Now, what we want to do is that if you're eating plant-based, what you're doing is that you need to get to 30 grams of fiber or more a day in the diet, slowly over time, 5 grams per week to get there, right? Fiber is what helps bind to toxins, right? Then what we do is we measure, like on a nutrition test, we're measuring alpha-lipoic, glutathione, other measurements of what helps with detox. We actually have on the test, it will measure detoxification markers biologically and biochemistry-wise. Everybody's unique. So even though we all eat maybe be plant-based, your detoxification markers might be different, just like your nutrient levels might be different, just like your antioxidants. So even if we eat the same food, everybody's test is unique and different. And that's what we go one further step than most people. Most people say, hey, go to a plant-based diet, everything is good, right? And most things get better, 80%. But 20%, there's a subtle nuance. But people are like, hey, I mean that you might have a food sensitivity, you might have something else. So we want to check that. But having the bowel movement, the regular, detoxification is having 2 to 3 well-formed bowel movements a day. If you can do that, no matter how much your exposure, you're actually eliminating screening. If you're constipated, if you're eating a standard American diet, keto, paleo diet, you're not getting enough short-chain fatty acids, which is fiber, you're not producing enough N-butyrate in your gut, your beta-glucuronidase would be low, then the toxicity is going to be high. So sometimes we can't avoid stuff because that's just the water that we live in or area that we have, right? Or the job that we're getting exposure. But there's a way that your body can naturally just be protective, and that's predominantly through diet. But we will measure those things, and then we give recommendations based on whether we need to treat or not.
So you're located in Albuquerque. How would someone go about getting these tests if they're not?
So when they make an appointment, we actually have those testing kits shipped to them, and then they just get their blood drawn, the urine, the stool, they mail it off, and then we do all the consultations and the coaching and all via Zoom.
And then you create like a unique protocol for that particular
unique protocol. Yeah, because the challenge is right now, everybody when most people that see me, particularly when they see a program like this, they would come to me and they're like, I did a candida cleanse, I did a parasite cleanse or whatever, I did a detox. And I'm like, well, why? Oh, because someone told me I should do that. I go, do you have candida? Well, I think, they said everybody has parasites or everybody has heavy metals. I'm like, well, let's test it. Like, put it to the test. If you don't have that problem, then you're chelating out healthy minerals, and now you got a mineral deficiency. If you're taking an antimicrobial, even if it's natural therapies, then you're knocking out microbiome dysfunction even more because these things are not specific. A lot of people don't understand mechanism of action of pharmacology. So say, oh, I just take this herb. I'm taking this candida cleanse for 6 months. Well, guess what? It may only take 2 weeks to get rid of candida if they truly had it. And now it's kind of like an amoxicillin or antibiotic. Now we're causing microbiome dysfunction. Now they have leaky gut. Now they have more food allergies. Now they have this kind of cascading. Even though they're coming in with the right intention, never blame them. But the idea is that there's a lot of practitioners, people who just throw programs like, you got to detox, you got to do this, you got to do that. We can help anybody wherever you're at. I have patients all around the world. So we even connect in people like in other countries. We have to figure out time zones and all. But this is what people want because as a consultant, I like to help people. Most people have a primary, most people have 2 or 3 specialists, cardiologists, neurologists, GI, this, that, orthopedic. But our goal is to look at like, what are your meds? What are your supplements? And let's pare it down. What do you really need to eat? When we take a nutrition test, for example, it will then tell us how much of what you need. And then more importantly, what I'm going to tell you is then what are the foods you should be eating more of to get it from the diet. Food is medicine, and supplements supplement the diet. They don't replace the diet. That's why we give targeted therapies. Boswellia is a targeted therapy. Vitamin D, for example, targeted therapy. Glucan 300 is targeted therapy. But I'm not giving vitamin C. I'm not giving vitamin A. Other people take all these supplements, and I'm like, no, you can just easily eat these foods today, and your numbers will go up. So that's how we approach it. Sanjevni.net. They can contact us and make an appointment.
Great, thank you. And I want to ask you about supplements momentarily, but you brought up parasites, and actually just saw David Wolf having, selling some sort of like anti-parasite, supplement of some sort, and the video is horrifying, and everybody has parasites. Does everybody have parasites? And to that extent, how do you know, and what should you do about it?
So, not to get into controversy here, but
okay, you can get into some controversy.
I'm a clinical guy. I'm a science guy. I'm not a marketing guy. Mm-hmm. So people can say all they want. They can show you scary videos and make claims. They can't put it to the test. They can't show before and afters. We can show them before and after. So if someone does a parasite cleanse and they don't have parasites, then we can show dysfunction to the microbiome via testing. So to answer that question, no. To answer that question, no. And to answer that question, you need to have someone who's actually a trained clinical professional, not a fancy marketer, to tell you what to do.
So
because a lot of people follow those things, right? And if someone says like, you got to do this over and over again, then you have to look at, are they not having a good microbiome? Are they not eating a clean enough diet or plant-based diet? And are they helping themselves? That's how I look at it. And if they're not, then this is just like everybody can sell anything, right? And so like, yes, but do people have parasites? Yes. Do I get maybe 6 people a month? Yes. Right? Because they tested, they have some kind of, gut issue. Some people may not have the symptoms and test positive. I had a patient the other day. They actually had the parasite. They actually could see it on the microscope, on the lab testing, and also by PCR, which is like the DNA kind of part of it, right? Some people will say like, oh, I'm having symptoms. Like I went on a cruise or I ate something at a restaurant. I got diarrhea a couple months ago, but it's still kind of off, and we can capture it. So some people will actually have it, but it's to say like when someone does like a live cell analysis or something like that, or whatever. We are not sterile beings, right? We have 4 pounds of over 100 trillion of over 1,000 species of microbes in our gut. We also have things that are floating in our blood. So it's not to say like, oh my God, everybody has a problem. Like, no, you have also an immune system, and there's something called biology, anatomy, physiology. But since most people don't understand that or study that and can sell you products, then it's a story that sounds good because everybody's gonna say, well, I do feel fatigued. Yes, I do feel yes, but are they telling you should be eating a whole food plant-based diet? Are they testing your microbiome? Are they testing your food sensitivities? Are they looking at your nutritional deficiencies? No, they're selling you a program that you got to do over and over every couple of months. Right. So that the controversy for me is like, you got to demonstrate real. I mean, and that's why, I'm Dr. Pai and everybody else are social media influencers at the end of the day, when I see certain people. Right. And it's like, I'm not saying that they're bad people. They have good ideas and people can follow what they want. But when I come to see certain people that have gone through programs, they're actually depleted over time.
Okay. And the testing that you offer that we were discussing earlier, would that include the testing for parasites, or is that something separate? Yeah.
So on the microbiome test, so I'll just give you an example. Okay. So on the microbiome test, it will test like, for example, upper to lower digestive enzyme functionings. Do people need to even have digestive enzymes or not? Right. If someone's levels are good, they don't. If someone's levels are low, they should have some. Then we'll talk about what kinds. It will look at protein, fat, fiber. Are you not only eating enough, but more importantly, are you absorbing enough? I had a patient the other day. They were trying to get more weight. They were underweight. I'm trying to, he's trying to get more weight. It's like, I'm eating. So we have to look at like, first of all, are they getting enough? And then are they absorbing? If they have any increased intestinal permeability, which is like leaky gut, or if they have any inflammatory bowel condition, that's going to cause a malabsorption of nutrients. Right? Then we look at short chain fatty acids, which is fiber, and is it converting and is it detoxifying? It measures all the good and bad bacteria. There's ratios of good and bad, and are you converting, all these other aspects. And then they look at mycology and bacteriology and parasites. So when they grow it out, they look at it, takes 3 weeks. And then so we'll identify it. If there's a parasite, we'll identify it. If there's a bacteria, they'll identify it. And if there's a mycology like a candida or a yeast or a fungi, they'll identify it. Then what they do, which is nice, is they test the sensitivity and resistance to natural therapies and prescription therapies. Now, I like to use natural therapies, by the way, so the lab will have like, these are the natural, 3 natural antibiotics, for example, and here's the 5 normal common prescription drugs. But they learn then, is it sensitive, meaning it works, or is it resistant and it doesn't? What we don't do is just blanket, like most people say, you got a candida problem, take this candida product. You got a parasite problem, take this parasite product. You got a bacterial overgrowth, SIBO, this, that, take this product. But guess what? On the testing, we can show that almost half of the products now that are in the natural world have resistance. Let me say that. Half the products in the natural world have resistance. Why? Because everybody's using these things too much. Just like we overused antibiotics too much on the prescriptive side. Now everybody's going to the health store or buying online saying, I got to pre-treat my problem. Guess what? You pre-treat your problem. If you don't have the problem, just like taking too much Z-Pak all the time, the microbes then change their genetic shift and genetic drift, and then they have a resistance. So a lot of people come back and like, guess what? Your oregano is resistant, right? Like, so people are like, oh, I've been taking oregano, whatever the product is, right? Like, I'm not, I'm taking it, but like, and it's like, well, and sometimes people are saying, but I don't even take that stuff. Why is it, I don't even, but guess what? The rest of the planet is taking this over and over and over. And particularly since the pandemic, everybody was taking tons of things, for prevention or worry or scare. But the idea is that we wouldn't take amoxicillin every day for prevention either, right? And people are like, that doesn't make sense. That would cause damage. But when we think of natural therapies, people don't understand the mechanism of pharmacology of how natural herbs are just the same. The only difference is it comes from a plant rather than a lab that actually derived those molecules from a plant and made it at a higher potency.
Okay, thank you for that. So going back to supplements, what are the most important supplements that you think that a person who is trying to get to optimal health on a plant-based diet should be taking?
So I always recommend the Boswellia just because we want to lower inflammation. Even though people on a plant-based diet will be in an anti-inflammatory state, we want to do the food testing to further define if they have any inflammatory foods from a plant world. Because you can. Like I had a patient yesterday, they had a sensitivity to kale, a superfood that everybody's going to tell you to eat, right? But if she eats the kale, she will flare. Right. And this is where people get, so it could be an avocado, it could be kale, it could be a blueberry. And these are all things that are so good for us, for everyone else. And that person will take it and then they can have problems. So we want to look at from a Boswellia because inflammation, even if you're not achy, just taking a small amount for lowering inflammation prevents aging. We're looking at slowing down the change of the telomeres, right? So inflammation like asthma, allergy, right now in Albuquerque, allergy season. So it's like if someone takes it, they have a little bit of arthritis or back pain, guess what? Their upper respiratory congestion is lesser. Why? Because that's an inflammatory response from an inhalant, like a grass, a weed, a tree, or mold, or whatever. So Boswellia. Vitamin D, you need to make sure you're between 60 and 100 on the test. That's a simple thing for looking at immune system functioning. We will test it otherwise. Glucan 300, which is another the highest patented form. Again, clinical studies on that one. Again, looking at supporting natural killer cell functioning and lowering inflammation in the body. I look at those 3 as like kind of key. Then we look at based on the person's goals of where they're looking for or what they want to be. At the end of the day, we shift everybody in the beginning. Sometimes I give people some supplementation to change their diet, do all the testing. And then later on, we get to a level of optimum health, right? Which is where I want everybody, which is not just being like, oh, okay, I'm not having my problems anymore. It's like, you're not just drowning, your head's above water. You want to be sailing. Right? That's a level that people usually never experience, maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 years of their life. I remember a time when, right? And once we get to that level, then it's like, well, there's always a formula like, oh, I have a little problem with my vision. I'm on the computer all day, or I have a little less. Then we want to teach people like, these are certain things that you can take and we'll give you the clinical ones, the clinical doses. Here's the data, but it's not taking a barrage of things. A lot of people like take tons of things. They come to my office. Average person has 8 to 12 prescription drugs and about 12 to 20 supplements. That's the kind of person I see, by the way. And they're not feeling good on either end. They're like, I get all these pills from my doctor in the pharmacy, and I got all these pills from my chiropractor, my naturopath, my acupuncturist, and my holistic doctor, and they still have all their 20 problems, right? So the goal is to actually look at, we're not anti-pharma, we're just anti-side effect, we're pro-patient, pro-safety, pro-data. So we want to look at what's the best of everything. And I'm really honest. I'll tell people, if you're taking a good product, you're taking the right thing. But sometimes on their test, I'll give you an example. A patient came in the other day. We did a nutrition test. She's taking magnesium. She's taking a glycinate lysate chelated complex, which is the best form. It's kind of that we actually get. So I'm like, hey, you got the right thing. But she's only taking 150 milligrams on it. And her test came back that she needs 800.
Wow.
So she's not going to get that benefit. I'm like, do you still feel achy? Yes. Your legs are cramping? Yes. All these things. Are you still constipated? Yes. Are you having trouble sleeping? Yes. It's just like you're taking the right product, but you're just not taking enough. But how will we know? We won't know unless you test. So that's where, like, even getting the guidance on dosages, because everybody might even take the right supplement. They might even do the right, most people do their research these days on some level. So they have an idea of like, yeah, I know this, but then it's like, well, what was done in the study? And then what does your body say it also needs? If we can evaluate, that's when the supplement really works well, or the food really works well, or the lifestyle chain really works well. But we have to have measurements. And then that also keeps patients more compliant. And also it makes them super happy because check off, like, hey, heart disease, diabetes, this, check, 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 check. I reversed all these conditions. And it happens every day. We have patients all the time reversing heart disease, diabetes, improving their outcomes from cancer, everything.
So do you see a lot of plant-based patients? And if so, how do they do? And what do they get wrong about implementing a plant-based diet?
So I do see a lot of, and that's actually been increasing just over the last 5 years, right? So even though, we've been plant-based since 2006, it's just because of programs like this, and books and movies and the Game Changers and things like that, and Forks Over Knives and all those kind of things, right? Which we actually had a little part of the Game Changers aspect. But yes, I do see a lot of plant-based, but what they all don't understand is that I'll give you a classic example. So 3 weeks ago, I had a guy came in and he's super plant-based. He's a type A personality, fitness, kind of hardcore, like, he's like a fun manager, like he's a kind of finance guy, right? So like bam, 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 like just checking all the boxes on, and a super hardcore. His diet is impeccable. Not only is organic everything, but he's like hardcore. Like he's seen the little wheel and he's checked off, like, like here's how many grain seeds. So like literally, and to be honest, for me, I was almost like, okay, this is too much, because, I will eat occasionally packaged food that's plant-based and, blah, blah, blah. Or fine. I'm not perfect, right? I don't eat animal protein at all, but, and I'm not 100% whole foods. This guy was 100% whole foods, right? And I'm like, okay. And he had no gut symptoms. His gut symptoms were daily bowel movements, 3 bowel movements, well-formed, banana shape, blah, 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 no symptoms. And then we did his nutrition test, and his nutrition test was terrible. It was all moderate to severe deficiency. And I'm like, well, how is this possible? That means he must have some kind of malabsorption syndrome or something wrong with his gut. We tested him. His leaky gut was one of the highest off the chart that we've ever seen. Yet he's so healthy otherwise, because he's eating all the right things, that he's not really symptomatic of having gut symptoms, right? So there can be mismatches where people just are not, like he's still feeling tired. He's still feeling a little this. It's like, yeah, because he's not absorbing those nutrients. A lot of people also who just moved to plant-based are not eating enough plant-based foods. That's the biggest thing that we'll see across the board, is because when we remove the animal protein and the rest was like the sides, right? We would call it in an American meal. They didn't know how to make the sides the main. It's like, so a lot of people are like, I'm eating a little bit, but it's like, no. You need, 50 grams as a female, 60 grams as a male of protein a day minimally, and 30 grams of fiber, right? If you get to those goals, you'll start doing really well. The problem is most people, when they shift over, they have not learned that they need to eat more food. Remember, it's low calorie food. So most people will lose weight on a plant-based diet, but the idea is that we also have to make sure that they ensure that they're eating enough.
Okay, so you find that now when you say eating enough, is it a variety? Is that what you were saying? That
yeah, because we look at when we look at the testing, and also when we look at the microbiome, for example, it'll tell us like certain species, and there's ratios of species, like Akkermansia species, and most people are not eating enough what they call phytonutrients, color, in their diet. So what happens? A lot of people eat a lot of the same things. I'm just as guilty, by the way. Okay. So I always tell my patients, I'm as honest as anybody will get. I'll tell you what's good, what's bad. I'll tell you what are my vices as well, because it's a journey. Life is a daily practice. Someone comes and say life is good, and I used to do that. That's usually a sell. I always that's a red flag for me. It's like, look, so I'll tell you this. I have my 2 favorite greens, my 2 favorite grains, my 2 favorite beans. I can eat a vegan taco like 3 times a day. Okay. So but it's not diverse. You need to make sure that you're getting diverse rainbow colored foods. I may not be able to say that in Florida, but rainbow colored foods is what we need. So all the phytonutrients, all the reds, yellows, greens, blues, you see that little rainbow chart that they usually show, like on the nutritionfacts.org and the PCRM, they'll show those kind of things. You can download those things, charts. So reds, yellows, greens, light greens, purples, blues, all the different legumes. Every color phytonutrient actually increases microbiome diversity, also has anti-inflammatory effects indirectly. Antioxidants are actually anti-inflammatory secondary actions. So sometimes it's like we just got to increase that, the absorption, the improvement of the intake, and their inflammation will go down from another level just from the food.
Great, thank you. So you mentioned that you have a YouTube show about healing spices. What should we be taking daily?
So I would have you go to YouTube, type in Chef AJ and Dr. Pai. We do a monthly show. I'm taking a book. There's a great book that you can get. It's not mine, but I don't mind promoting someone else's book because it's a great book. It's called Healing Spices.
Okay.
And Dr. Agarwal is a famous researcher scientist. He used to work at MD Anderson in the cancer therapeutics division. He actually discovered many pathways for a lot of biological drugs that are used today for cancer and autoimmune diseases. His pastime with his 100 postdocs was actually looking at all the Ayurvedic Chinese herbs and spices and actually analyzing them for physiological benefits. The book is great because it takes them through spices from the historical use from all over the world, different cultures, to how you need to store it, to how you should buy it, the different forms of it, and then gives you a couple of examples. It's not a plant-based book, so I always tell people just take out the animal protein and make a plant-based protein and substitute in the recipe. But that's how you need to learn. There's not just a single spice that everybody should take, but what you'll learn, here's the challenge, and it's something that I will say, since I'm going to be on the panel tomorrow night with other plant-based doctors, is that my biggest kind of issue with the plant-based movement here in America is that the diets that we prescribe or recommend to most people, at least from my perspective, my opinion only, is it's quite bland and boring, right? Because a lot of people, again, no fault of their own, it's like meat and potatoes, right? They grew up with meat and potatoes, so we take away the meat, now we have potatoes and some vegetables. So then it became like kale and quinoa and 3-bean salad, and that kind of became the salad. But I'm not here to teach people to eat salad all day long. I don't think that's appropriate. People need to eat what they're used to eating, just they need to eat plant-based. So I should make vegan enchiladas. I should make vegan spaghetti. I should be able to eat plant-based Thai food or Indian food or Mexican food. Right? So I eat a variety of flavors and foods, and a lot of people are afraid of spices because they think it's spicy. And when you learn about the book or we listen to the videos once a month, and I'll also have it on our own channel. We're having our podcast coming out in the next couple of weeks. We'll do a weekly show. Is that, and we'll show recipes and we'll do some cooking classes as well online. It's like, these are things that you incorporate daily. And so you'll see that a lot of these foods help with heartburn and reflux and this and that. And yet the average person has heartburn and reflux because they're not eating the foods that actually help their digestion or help their issue. We just end up taking drugs that are treating symptoms and not actually improving the physiological aspects of health.
Okay, thank you. Are there plants in the the plant-based diet that should be avoided that are for their pro-inflammatory properties?
No, but there is when the patient tests positive for the plant on a food sensitivity panel. So that's where when a lot of people go plant-based and say they become hardcore, like they say, I watch the series or I buy a 21-day program, which is all great. I want to be encouraging. I want people to be challenged because that's how we need to change. And sometimes the challenge is good. But a lot of times, like the patient I saw yesterday, they had kale, they had like lemon, they had, some things that some things that you wouldn't even think of, right? But they were sensitive to, like it comes back really high in their test. So, avocado was one. So we're trying to eat more avocados as healthy fat, right? Try to have more kale as a superfood or a super green. But the more she would eat, the more inflamed she'd get. And then she's like, gosh, I don't really feel good eating plant-based. She only had like 4 or 5 things, but there's 4 or 5 things that she would have regularly. Like people have like maybe a juice with apple in them, like carrot, apple, ginger, whatever kind of thing. And so she wouldn't feel good. And then they would say, you know what? Forget this. I think I'm going to go back to my regular diet. Like this is not for me, right? My body doesn't not understand. Like it might just be a few things. So we always like to individualize the plant-based diet because your body can be sensitive to anything, plant, vegetable, grain, legume, seed, or nut, right? So it's not just saying like all plants are good. All plants are good, but to that individual, certain plants may not be. And then it's not always going to be avoidance forever. There's also going to be a way that we're going to fix the microbiome. We're going to get the inflammation down. We're going to get the immune system stronger. And then we're going to start rotating certain foods so the body become more tolerant to those foods over time.
And that's actually what I was going to ask you. So basically what you're saying is that you thought it was a microbiome imbalance and that fixing the microbiome will make it so that those foods will be tolerable.
Yeah. So in the before we had all this microbiome studying, we used to just do like avoidance of the food and then rotation of certain foods. And there's a way to do that. When people see me, we do that. But what happens is now we know that when someone comes back with a lot of food sensitivities, now most people in the body is going to be able to be like a few, right? Everybody's body's like, it's allowed to have a few things it doesn't like. But when people come back, it's like, wow, that's a lot of things, like a full page of stuff all over the chart, right? You plant, animal, in between. Then we have to look at there's probably some kind of gut issue. And when now the studies will show, and clinically that we can see ourselves, because that's what we do every day, is that we actually see that they have a higher rate of having leaky gut or increased intestinal permeability that then has those food proteins, even if it's plants, come into the gut, triggering these inflammatory responses. So the key is restoring that microbiome function as well as avoidance and rotating. And then they're more successful at keeping those foods in the diet, because we still want to incorporate as much plant foods because they have also phytonutrients, antioxidants, anti-inflammatory proteins, and fiber, and also they taste good. So, like if you could never eat avocado, then Mexican food would be very sad for me. So there's ways that we want to bring back some of the foods just because of nutrient value. But then this is how we need to individualize each person's diet, not just say, hey, just go eat more plant-based. Hey, just go eat more plant-based, or just do more of this. We now have to start fine-tuning and tweaking those. That's when we get the wonderful results of consultation.
Okay, I just want to get a couple of quick questions in from the audience. We've got Paul. Paul, please state your name, where you're from, and ask your question.
Yeah, Paul, I'm from New York City. Thanks for your presentation. And my basic question is, you spoke that the body can build up resistance to even the natural products. So with your products, should we be rotating on them? Boswellia, should we be rotating on and off, or can we stay on them long term?
So you can stay on long term because of the balance of those ingredients. But I always have with all products, if someone is healthy, now someone's like a chronic disease thing, then I want to keep the anti-inflammatory action going on all the time. But if someone is really healthy overall, then I usually do a cycle, like, just take a weekend off or take a week off and then restart it. But if they stop it for Boswellia for a week, for example, and they still have a pro-inflammatory problem, and they'll notice it. They'll notice, and so that's why people are like, oh my God, it's a wonderful thing. I take it and all these things get better. And I'm like, great, fantastic. Thank you for taking it. But then I say, we still have to look at, because these are people like, say, you will walk in our store, walk in our center, they haven't become a patient yet. And then I'll say, and they're like, I'm so glad you have this. So I get all the praises and all thankful. The patient's always thankful. The customer's thankful. But to me, I'm like, well, we still have to investigate why, when you stop it, you're flaring. Right? Because then over time, you need less. You might only need one a day rather than two twice a day, or 2-3 times a day for someone who's having a big flare. So, but yeah, you can cycle it, but there's no harm in taking it daily. I just have a tendency that when I'm in a less inflamed issue, like just a daily preventative, I can just take one twice a day or even once a day, just for just general prevention. But obviously then I can go up more if I need more, and the patient can do the same.
Great.
Good question, by the way.
Thank you. Our next question is going to be from Karen. Karen, please state your name, where you're from, and state your question.
Hi, my name's Karen Johnson from the state of Maine, and my husband and I are plant-based, but my 32-year-old son, he has a herniated disc and a bulging disc, and he's, not plant-based, and I'm wondering, he sees a chiropractor all the time, has been for 8 months, and I'm wondering if he did go plant-based and he did, take some of these alternative to ibuprofen, the Boswellia, if somebody like him with more of a physical issue, if, going plant-based and doing alternative things might help his situation in terms of.
Great question, Karen. Absolutely. Because remember, and if you read my book and if you watch any of the videos that I've done in the past, I go into more detail, but inflammation likes to go to places of trauma, pathology, which is disease, overuse, or places where your immune system is not functioning well. So in your case, in your son, for example, if he's got a disc problem or a back problem where there's some kind of physiological problem with the, compression or, bulge or nerve compression or injury, then that's already like the damage. And then anything that's pro-inflammatory. So the more animal protein that he eats, it just caused the back pain to get worse. Chiropractic is just kind of adjusting the anatomy, but it's not fixing the physiological problem of the inflammation that's still coming in. So they might get temporary relief, but then it's like 8 months later. And I get patients all the time, like 10 years later, seeing the chiropractor, twice a month for back pain. Then I'm like, well, they're not curing the back pain. It's temporary relief. It's kind of like taking a natural ibuprofen from the hands, right? So what you want to do is, yes, having it. But here's the thing. If someone's really hesitant, and this is where, half my patients might be plant-based, half my patients are not plant-based. They're paleo, keto. They're coming in, and this is kind of a tough discussion. But remember, I'm not, it's their problem. I always don't it's your back pain. That's not my back pain. I sleep well at night. So I'm not here to tell anybody, everybody has their own karma. Everybody has their own life, what to live and how well they want to live it. My job is to give the people the perfect opportunity to live their best. Right. And sometimes we have to just change our ways. So where the bargain is, and someone who's especially younger patients, right? Because I see and older patients. So on the spectrum, there's just going to be change is going to be difficult because everybody eats this way. Like if you're a college student, or if you're already 75 or so, change is sometimes a little bit more difficult, right? Because we get stuck in our ways. I always say, let's just test all the foods, plant, animal, vegetable, grain, legume, seeds, and nuts, and say which food is causing the most inflammation in their body from a sensitivity immediately, meaning within an hour, and a delayed up to four days later. And then when we find that foods and we remove it, some of it's going to be from the plant food, some of it's going to be from the animal food, then their inflammation burden goes down most significantly. Then they're more apt to change their lifestyle because they're feeling better, right? Without being like, I'm going completely 100% plant-based. That's a little bit too much of a lifestyle change. So I always kind of have this, like, what can I do to lead them in that direction of health? Once they know what their true triggers are on both sides of the realm, because we don't be like, hey, go plant-based, eat more of this. And that's also sensitivity. And they go, that didn't work. My back pain got worse, not knowing why. It might be one or two things. So once we kind of fine tune that and they lower their inflammation, then they're more apt to change their lifestyle going forward because they're like, I don't want to have more back pain.
Thank you so much, Doctor. That concludes our Q&A session. So I want to thank you personally. You did a wonderful job, and we're going to open up the microphone so the audience can also say thank you to you.
Thank you, everyone.
So much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Pai.
Thank you.
Very much, everyone. Thank you for taking your time on a Saturday.